This morning, something happened that 230 oil tankers have been waiting 49 days for. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow strip of water that carries 20% of the world's oil, was declared open. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted on X at dawn. The waterway is, quote, completely open to commercial vessels. Within minutes, oil prices crashed 12%, the biggest single-day drop since this war began. West crude fell to $83 a barrel, its lowest level since March 10th. Stock markets surged. The S&P 500 hit record highs. The Nasdaq hit record highs. Wall Street celebrated like the war was over. It is not over. Within hours of Iran's announcement, Trump posted his own statement. The U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, he said, will remain in full force until Iran reaches a full peace deal, including on its nuclear program. And then Iran's parliament speaker, the same man who sat across the table from G. Vance for 21 hours in Islamabad, announced that the strait will not remain open if the American blockade continues. Open, closed, open, closed. In one morning, the world's most important waterway was declared open and then threatened with closure simultaneously by both sides. This is Respect B. And what happened today is more complicated, more dangerous, and more consequential than any headline you will read about it. Stay with me, because the gap between what the markets celebrated this morning and what is actually happening is where the real story lives. Let's reconstruct exactly what happened today, because the sequence matters enormously. For 49 days since February 28th, the Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed, not legally. Iran never issued a formal blockade declaration, but the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps threatened any vessel attempting transit. They fired on ships, they laid sea mines, they intercepted tankers. The message was clear even without a formal announcement. Major shipping companies Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, CMA-CGM suspended operations. Insurance premiums made transit economically impossible for most carriers. Ship traffic dropped by roughly 90%, 230. Loaded oil tankers have been sitting idle inside the Persian Gulf, waiting. Global oil prices jumped. Fertilizer supplies were disrupted. Food prices started climbing. The world's most important energy corridor was closed, and it stayed closed through negotiations, through threats, through ceasefires, through 21 hours of talks in Islamabad that produced nothing. Then this morning, Iran moved. Foreign Minister Araghchi announced on X that the strait is completely open for commercial vessels for the remaining period of the ceasefire. He added one condition that most headlines buried. Ships will use routes designated by Iran and travel in coordination with Iranian authorities. Read that again. Iran is declaring the strait open, but ships must use Iran's designated routes and coordinate with Iranian officials to do so. This is not free passage. This is supervised passage. Iran is not surrendering control of the strait. It is choosing for now to exercise that control in a way that allows ships through. The distinction is enormous, because what Iran is describing is precisely what the U.S. has said it will never accept as a permanent arrangement. Trump's response confirmed this immediately. He thanked Tehran publicly on Truth Social. He called it a good development, and then he said the blockade remains in full force until a complete deal is reached. So the situation as of this morning is this. Iran says the strait is open under Iranian coordination. Trump says the blockade on Iranian ports and ships continues regardless. Iran's parliament speaker says if the blockade continues, the strait closes again. Three statements made within hours of each other, all of them simultaneously true, all of them pointing in different directions. This is not resolution. This is a new phase of the same standoff, with the ceasefire expiring in 4 days. Wall Street's reaction to this morning's news was immediate and dramatic. Oil dropped 12% in a single session. U.S. crude at $83.85 a barrel. The S&P 500 closed at a record high, its third consecutive record close. The Nasdaq up nearly 7% for the week. Markets are pricing in peace, and that creates a specific, serious danger. When markets price in an outcome before that outcome is confirmed, they create pressure on decision makers to deliver it. Because if the outcome does not materialize, the sell-off is violent. The economic pain becomes political pain, and political pain creates pressure to do something, anything to stop the bleeding. Here is the problem. The ceasefire expires in 4 days. The blockade is still in force. Iran's parliament has set a condition: Hormuz sovereignty, that America has publicly called non-negotiable. The nuclear issue remains completely unresolved, and Iran's parliament speaker said today explicitly that the strait will close again if the blockade persists. Markets heard open. They did not hear temporarily, conditionally, under Iranian coordination, subject to immediate reversal if American pressure continues. That is not a peace announcement. That is a tactical move by Iran, opening the strait to relieve economic pressure on itself and on the region, while retaining the ability to close it again instantly. It costs Iran nothing to open it for 4 days while ceasefire talks continue. It generates enormous goodwill globally. It creates the appearance of Iranian reasonableness, and it can be reversed the moment negotiations collapse. Compare this to what happened after the first ceasefire was announced on April 8th. Iran announced the Strait was open then too. Trump claimed the Strait had reopened. Markets reacted positively, and then within 24 hours ships were being turned away again. The URG was charging tolls. Iran was conditioning passage on payment and coordination. The script today is nearly identical to the script of April 8th. The difference is, this time the ceasefire expires in 4 days instead of 2 weeks. Alongside the Hormuz announcement this morning, Trump posted something on Truth Social that, if true, would be the single most significant development of this entire war. He said, and this is his exact post, "The USA will get all nuclear dust created by our great B-2 bombers. No money will exchange hands in any way, shape, or form. Nuclear dust." That is the phrase Trump uses for Iran's highly enriched uranium material that was buried underground when American B-2 bombers struck Iran's nuclear facilities during last year's 12-day war and again during this conflict. Trump is claiming that Iran has agreed to hand over its enriched uranium to the United States. If that is true, it is the central demand of this entire war. The condition that G. Vance said Iran refused to accept in Islamabad, the red line that collapsed 21 hours of talks. If Iran has agreed to surrender its nuclear material, the war is essentially over. So why is nobody confirming it? Not Iran, not Pakistan, the mediator, not any of the regional officials involved in negotiations. Iran's foreign ministry has said nothing about nuclear material transfers. Pakistan has said nothing. No intermediary has confirmed Trump's claim. The pattern here is important to understand. Throughout this conflict, Trump has repeatedly announced outcomes that were not yet confirmed or were partially true but described as complete. He announced the Strait was reopened on March 9th. It was not. He announced Iran had asked for a ceasefire on April 1st. Iran denied it. He announced the ceasefire on April 7th before. Iran had formally agreed. Each time, the announcement created a brief market rally, a brief wave of optimism, and then a correction when reality caught up with the claim. Today's nuclear dust post follows the same pattern. It may be true, there may be a back-channel understanding that Iran will allow removal of enriched uranium as part of a final deal. Trump may be signaling the shape of a deal that is close but not yet signed, or it may be aspirational. A negotiating move designed to create public momentum and pressure Iran into confirming what Trump has already declared. The dangerous version of this scenario is that Iran has not agreed in Trump's public claim. Makes it politically harder for Iran to agree, because doing so now looks like capitulation to a public statement rather than a negotiated outcome. Watch whether Iran responds to this claim in the next 24 hours. If Tehran stays silent, that silence could mean many things. If Tehran denies it, the ceasefire is in serious trouble. Here is the paradox at the center of today's events that nobody is explaining clearly. Iran opened the Strait. America kept the blockade. Both sides are now claiming the other is acting in bad faith simultaneously. Iran's position is straightforward. The ceasefire agreement required the Strait to be reopened. Iran opened it. The US imposed a blockade on Iranian ports despite the ceasefire. That blockade is itself a ceasefire violation. Therefore, Iran demanding the blockade be lifted before committing to anything further is entirely reasonable. America's position is also internally consistent. The Strait being open is a precondition for any deal but opening. It is not the same as a deal. The blockade is the leverage that produces the deal. Lifting the blockade before the deal is signed removes the only economic pressure forcing Iran to negotiate seriously. Both positions make sense on their own terms. The problem is they are structurally incompatible. Iran will not sign a deal while the blockade chokes its economy. America will not lift the blockade until a deal is signed. This is the negotiating equivalent of two people who both agree they want to shake hands, but neither will extend their arm first. And underneath this impasse, it's a deeper strategic question that very few analysts are asking publicly. What does Iran actually want from this war? Not the stated demands, the real objectives. Iran's supreme leader was assassinated. Its military was significantly degraded. Its economy has absorbed losses. The government itself estimates at up to $1 trillion. 3 million of its citizens have been internally displaced. No country accepts those costs without believing something meaningful can be salvaged. What Iran is fighting for underneath all the negotiations and statements is recognition. Recognition that it cannot simply be bombed into submission. Recognition that the Strait of Hormuz cannot be taken from it without consequences the world cannot absorb. Recognition that any post-war arrangement must give Iran something to show its own People something that looks like not having lost. The enriched uranium question is really a question about dignity. Surrendering nuclear material under blockade and military pressure with no peace deal signed, no sanctions lifted, no security guarantees in place looks like surrender. Iran has shown it will absorb extraordinary punishment before accepting terms that look like surrender. That calculus has not changed. Opening the strait this morning is not evidence that it has changed. It is evidence that Iran is a sophisticated strategic actor making tactical moves that cost nothing and gain goodwill while the fundamental positions remain unchanged. 4 days. The ceasefire expires on April 22nd. Here is the most honest picture of what the next 96 hours actually contain. Trump said today that Iran wants to meet and that a second round of talks could happen this weekend. In a brief call with Axios, he said, quote, "The Iranians want to meet. They want to make a deal. I think a meeting will probably take place over the weekend. Pakistan is the likely host again. Officials are working on logistics, but there is a critical difference between this potential second round and the first round in Islamabad. The first round had 2 weeks of ceasefire ahead of it when it began. The parties could afford 21 hours of talks because there was time to absorb failure. This round, if it happens, will begin with 4 days of ceasefire remaining. If talks start Saturday and run through Sunday and produce no agreement, the ceasefire expires Tuesday. There is no buffer. There is no second chance after this second chance. And here is what makes the next 96 hours particularly volatile. The strait is now officially open, but under Iranian coordination, shipping companies are cautiously watching to see whether the opening is real. Insurance underwriters need to assess risk before they will allow vessels to transit. The 230 tankers sitting in the Gulf will not move immediately even if the announcement is genuine. The process of restarting traffic takes days, not hours. So the economic relief that markets celebrated this morning will not be felt at the gas pump this week or next week. The supply chain disruption that has been building for 49 days does not unwind overnight. Fertilizer that was not shipped in March and April does not plant itself in the fields of Iowa and Indiana. Food prices that rose will not fall in time for the American consumer to feel relief before the ceasefire expires. The economic pain that is driving political pressure for a deal, that pain continues regardless of what markets did today. Step back for a moment from the hourly updates. 49 days into this war, here is what has already permanently changed regardless of how the next 4 days resolve. The Strait of Hormuz will never again be treated as a neutral, guaranteed international waterway. Before February 28th, global trade operated on the assumption that the strait was open, insurance was priced accordingly, supply chains were built accordingly, energy markets were structured accordingly. That assumption is gone. The closure demonstrated that a single regional power under military pressure can shut down 20% of the world's oil supply for nearly 2 months. The economic consequences felt in gas prices, food prices, manufacturing costs, airline operations have been documented and will not be forgotten by the engineers of global supply chains. The world will restructure around this reality. Alternative routes will be developed. Strategic reserves will be reconsidered. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, who depend on the strait for their own oil exports, will accelerate their Hormuz bypass infrastructure. The strategic geography of global energy is being redrawn in real time. Second, the relationship between the United States and its European allies has been fundamentally damaged. NATO was not consulted. European allies were not informed. The war was launched during negotiations, a fact that shattered trust in American diplomatic commitments. Britain, France, Germany, countries that have stood beside America in every major conflict since World War II, refuse to join this war, publicly, explicitly, on the record. Britain's Keir Starmer said he would not be dragged in. France's Macron organized a separate coalition to manage Hormuz without American leadership. Germany cut its growth forecasts and absorbed the economic damage in silence. The transatlantic alliance that has been the foundation of Western security for 80 years has a fracture running through it that will not close when this war ends. Third, Iran's regional proxy network Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, was not destroyed. By this war, it was tested, and it passed the test. Hezbollah coordinated strikes with Iranian missile volleys. The Houthis threatened to reactivate. Iraqi militias conducted hundreds of attacks on US forces. The network absorbed the pressure and remained operational. Any future conflict involving Iran will have to account for this network in ways that the pre-war planning apparently did not. This morning, oil fell 12%, markets hit record highs, and for a few hours it felt like the world exhaled. The Strait of Hormuz closed for 49 days, declared open, but the blockade remains, and Iran's parliament says it closes again if the blockade continues, and the ceasefire expires in 4 days, and Trump is claiming Iran agreed to surrender its nuclear material, a claim that nobody in Iran, nobody in Pakistan, nobody in the room has confirmed. The gap between what the markets price today and what is actually settled is enormous and dangerous, because when that gap closes, and it will close one way or another in the next 96 hours, the adjustment will be felt everywhere: at the pump, on the grocery shelf, in the portfolio, in the strategic calculations of every government on earth. The Strait of Hormuz is open this morning. Whether it is open on April 23rd, the day after the ceasefire expires, depends on what happens in conversations that are currently taking place in languages and locations that neither you nor I have access to. What we do have access to is the pattern, and the pattern says, do not celebrate until the ink is dry. This is respect. Subscribe, because the next 96 hours will tell us everything.